Okay, good morning. Good morning, Ezra. We are holding on Daf Nun Daled, Amud Base, page 54b, and we've been learning about this statement from Rav Acha Bar Chanina Midaroima. Ooh, that's what I really wanted to do, was check it up in that other book. This seems like an interesting story about Rav Acha Bar Chanina from Durham, from the south, that it's based on a Gemara in Psachim, and there seemed to be an argument if the Korban Chagiga overrides Shabbos. And Yehuda ben Dorsa held that Korban Chagiga's Deicha Shabbos overrides Shabbos, and the other rabbis disagreed. And he left. He went to live in the Durham in the south. And because if you live there, you're not obligated to bring the Korban Chagiga, because you're outside. You're outside of Yerushalayim. So so if he lived in a place that was outside Yerushalayim, he didn't have this obligation. It didn't come into any shilas. And this way, he followed his opinion. But the rabbis, he made a yeshiva there. But the rabbis were upset with him, and they and with the whole yeshiva, they called them the Gasei Haruach Umu'ute Torah. These are the Gasei Haruach, and the arrogant ones, and the ones who are minimizing the Torah, less they have. Anyway, bottom line is that it seems that every so often someone like Rav Acha Bar Chanina came from there, and the rabbis accepted what he, they were interested in hearing what he taught and what his opinion was, his brisa, his explanation of the brisa. And then there's a Yushalmi in Brachas that talks about Rabbi Yochanan trying to go there and bring them back to Yerushalayim. And anyway, so it seems like it's somewhat of a story here about the southern ones. See, often in the Gemara you have about the west. In the west, they would say this. The west always meant Eretz Yisrael. Right? So it was west of Babylon. But here we have like a different term, the southern, from the south. Rav Acha Bar Chanina from the south. Seems to be the story behind the meaning behind what that means. Who were the people of the south? It seems to be not just happen to live there, but there seems to be some story behind it of how they had an argument in halacha, and this had to do with Korban Chagiga, and they didn't have to. They wanted to get out of having any shilas. So if you don't live nearby, you're not obligated and bringing it. And anyway, so that's seems to be somewhat of a story here. But so this Rav Acha Bar Chanina came with a brisa, and he says that you learn from the word yisku that there is supposed to be blowings of tekiah of trumpets. There's supposed to be blowing of the chatzotzros of trumpets for each musaf. Every musaf needs to have 9 blowings. Tekiah, trua, tekiah, tekiah, trua, tekiah, tekiah, trua, tekiah. The three the sets, the three sets of 3. Each musaf needs their own. It's not that you do one and it covers all obligations, which you might want to call like a hybrid of fulfillment of all the mitzvahs, all the musafs. No, each one gets their own blows. And the Gemara dealt with that in a sense, like trying to compare notes and see, do we have any sources that shed some light on this new law that he's teaching us? And they came up with a few questions on him. See, it sounds like maybe he's wrong. So, like for example, one of the cases was that our Mishnah mentions about the 48 tekiyos, and it gives an example of where it's on Erev Shabbos on Sukkot, And the Gemara asks, according to Rav Acha Bar Chanina, the way he's understanding that you're supposed to do each musaf, it would have been a better idea. We could have picked a different case. You could have Shabbos during Sukkot, and you'll have more than 48 blows. You'll have 51 blows, because on a Friday you have 6. That's very nice. But on a musaf you have 9. So the difference between the Mishnah's case and the one that the Gemara suggests, and between a Friday and a Shabbos, is one of them you have an additional 6. The other one you have an additional 9. It's going to be an extra 3. If the Gemara would have picked, this case, would have been a Shabbos on Sukkot. So you got, you have the regular 21 blasts, and then you have the extra blasts for the water drawing ceremony, 12. You got 21 and 12. And now you're going to have, instead of an extra 6, you have an extra 9. So you'll have 51 altogether. That was the Gemara's question. And it must be that Rav Acha Bar Chanina is wrong. In other words, his understanding of, or his sources, something's wrong about that brisa, about this idea of blowing trumpets for every musaf gets 9 blasts. It can't be, because otherwise the Mishnah would have picked a case of 51. The Mishnah was talking about the maximum. So Reb Zera says, no, you actually don't have 51, because you lose 3. You gain 3, but you lose 3, because the first ones of the day were called the Psichas Sha'arim. Those first 3 blasts of the day, you don't do on Shabbos, he says. Reb Zera says, so you might gain 3, but you lost 3, so it ends up being the same 48. The example that the Mishnah gave and the example that you're suggesting is basically the same number. So it's not really benefiting us by giving your example versus the Mishnah's example. Gemara asks on that. Rava is not satisfied. He says that the Mishnah, when it talks about the first 3 of the day, it says b'chol yoim. Every day they would bring those 3. Sounds like it includes Shabbos. So that's number 1. So it sounds like it should be 51. And number 2, he says, even if it's not 51, it's only 48, but still, it would be, if it mentions this case of Shabbos on Sukkot, guess what it'll teach us? It'll be much better than mentioning the case of Friday on Sukkot, because it'll also let us know this law of Rav Acha Bar Chanina. So this would have been beneficial to say this case. So it's not just looking for the maximum amount of blows of 48. Okay, you got another case of 48. The Mishnah doesn't have to say your case, it says this case. No, it has to say the other case. It should say the other case, because the other case, the suggested case, has a benefit, because it also will teach us this law of Rav Acha Bar Chanina, that every musaf gets its own blowings. So Rava says, the reason why it doesn't mention this case is because you don't blow for the Miloi Mayim on Shabbos. They would draw the water before Shabbos, like we learned in the previous Mishnah. And what comes out is, if you don't draw for the Miloi Mayim, Ein Toiken LeMiloi Mayim b'Shabbos, so you're going to be losing out a number of these, so it's, in other words, if it's talking about Shabbos on Sukkot, it'll come out that all you'll have is 39, not 51. Why? You have the 21 blasts of a regular day, and basically you'll have Shabbos and Musaf of the Musaf Shabbos and Musaf of Sukkot. So you'll
what's the Miloi Mayim? Translate that.
The water filling, the filling of the waters. You don't have that. You're not going to have the miloi mayim, which is filling the water for the water libation, the water drawing ceremony blowings, because you're losing a lot of them. There was when the Shar Nicanor 3 blows, the when they went down the steers, they went down to the women's section and left. That was the Shara Tachtoin. They would go out the door of the women's section. Then another 3 blows, and then there was 3 blows for the when they would come to the Shar Hamayim, the gate, the water gate, and then there was another 3 blows, either the 10th step or the or for the willow when they would stand next to the Mizbeach, with the willows next to the Mizbeach. Basically, you'd miss out on all of those. You'd miss out on all of those 12 blasts. So, in other words, our calculation is 51, but if you subtract 12, you get 39. So, how do you get 39? Because you have the 21 on a regular day, 21 plus 18. 18 because you have two musafs. You have musaf of Shabbos and musaf of Sukkot. So you end up with you would end up with 39. So that's the Gemara's saying that Rava holds that it's not going to pick that case because that's not the maximum amount of blows. That's a case of only 39 blows, and we have a case of 48. So then the Gemara says, what about another option? What about Rosh Hashanah that falls on Shabbos? How many blasts do you have then? Rosh Hashanah that falls on Shabbos, you got 3 musafs. And musaf is sort of like winning the jackpot. Musaf is a nine blast ceremony. So if you have musaf of Rosh Chodesh, of Rosh Hashanah, of Shabbos, you got 3 things. You have 27 right there. And then you have the 21 of a regular day. So 27 plus 21 is 48. So according to this, why doesn't it mention the musaf the Rosh Hashanah that falls on Shabbos? So so the Gemara says, well, there's a reason why it should mention the case that it mentions instead of the case of Rosh Hashanah, because it is teaching us an opinion of Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov about the blowings that were done, that they weren't done on the 10th step, and they were done instead on when you put the willows next to the altar. So it is teaching us a special law by saying our case of 48 versus that case of 48 blasts. So the Gemara says that would be seemingly that would be a reason that would answer the problem. But the Gemara says no, because we're not telling you don't mention your case and only mention our case. We're suggesting mention both. You could do both. So the Gemara's answer to that is yeah, but the Tana isn't going to say every single case. He will leave out one. And the Gemara says, oh yeah, if he leaves out one, the common thing is that means he must have left out others as well, because it was just one other example, he would have said it. So what other case did he leave out? The Gemara says he left out Erev Pesach. And Erev Pesach, and this is where we turn the page to 54b, and it said Erev Pesach, that would be a case where seemingly you would have a 48 blows, and since it left out Erev Pesach, it left out the case of Rosh Hashanah as well. Now, how do you have 48 on Erev Pesach? So you got the regular 21, and you have 27. How do you have 27?
Okay.
You have 27 because each Hallel, they would recite Hallel 3 times with each group. So every time they did Hallel, they did 3 blasts. So if they said each group did Hallel, there was 3 groups, and each group said Hallel 3 times. In each Hallel, you did 3 blasts. So if you multiply that together, 3 times 3 times 3 is 27. In other words, each group did Hallel 9 times, did Hallel 3 times, which is 9 blows. And so each group had the trumpets blown 9 times, and there were 3 groups. So 9 times 3 is 27. So 27 plus the regular daily 21, you got 48. So it skipped out Rosh Hashanah, that falls on Shabbos, and it skips out the case of Erev Pesach. And it comes out that that once it's skipping, it's not saying all the cases. It suffices with one case. It picks our case, and it leaves out the other 2 cases. Although those 2 cases would also have been cases of 48 blasts. The Gemara says that according to Rabbi Yehuda, you don't blow the trumpets so many times, because according to Rabbi Yehuda, the final group only blew the blasts 3 times, not 9 times, the third group. So in other words, the Korban Pesach had 3 groups, but the last group, according to Rabbi Yehuda, only blew it 3, not 9. And according to that, what happens is that instead of coming up to 48, it loses 6, because they only blow 3 instead of 9. So they're losing 6 blasts. So instead of 48, you got 42. And so it's not a good example of a case where the Mishnah could have mentioned it and it left it out, and therefore it left out other cases. No, that's not a case where it left it out, because that's not a case of 48 blasts. That's a case of only 42 blasts. Gemara says, we're not following Rabbi Yehuda. We already made that clear before, that Rabbi Yehuda holds that when you talk about blasts, he considers every 3 blasts to be counted as 1. We're not following that. Our Mishnah counts 48. It doesn't count 16. So our Mishnah is in any way not going like Rabbi Yehuda. So why do we have to worry about Rabbi Yehuda? We did leave out 2 cases of 48 blasts. Yeah, it doesn't follow Rabbi Yehuda, but we're not following Rabbi Yehuda in the first place. The Gemara says, no, could be that we follow Rabbi Yehuda in some things, just not in the other thing. Could be that, we're not following him with his with the way he counts, the way he considers things. So therefore, what would be a case where we left out 48? We only have 1 case where we left out a case of 48 blasts. The Gemara says there has to be a second case if you want to if you want to assume that the Mishnah is just leaving out some cases, then they must have left out 2 cases. What would the other case be? So comes along the Gemara and says, well, even according to Rabbi Yehuda, you have a case that's 48, because Erev Pesach, that falls on an Erev Shabbos. You got an extra 6 blasts because it's Erev Shabbos. So you lost 6, but you gained 6. So it says apik shis va'ayil shis, and that's where we ended off. That you lost 6, you missed out on 6 blasts, because Rabbi Yehuda held that the final group that was bringing the Paschal offering, they only said Hallel once, and even the once they said it, they didn't finish it even. They only started it, so they blew 3 blasts, but they didn't blow the other 3. For the second time of Hallel, and the third 3 for the third time of Hallel. They didn't do those blasts then, but you lost 6. But it's fine, because you gained 6 from Erev Shabbos, and therefore it's basically skips out 2 cases of 48 blasts, and the Mishnah doesn't have to say every single case. It skipped out if you gave 1 example, and it skips out others. And now we're up to the Gemara on page 54b, and we're up to V'yein Moisifin al Arba'im Ushmoina. We never have more than 48. 48 blasts. And again, we're talking about the blowing of the trumpets that was done on a daily basis, and then there was additional trumpets blown on holidays, and it was especially for Musaf. And keep in mind that we still have to remember, because we're going to come back to this brisa of Rav Acha where he mentions that every Musaf gets its own 9 blasts. That's going to be something of major importance here. Okay, so here we go. Where are we up to? We're 54b, and ve'ein moisifin al arboim ushmaina. We must be about 10 lines from the top, maybe 9 lines from the top. Yeah, 9 lines from the top of the page. Ve'ein moisifin al arboim ushmaina. We never do more than 48. The Gemara says, "V'loi, no, we never do more than 48." Iga, isn't there cases of that there are more? Erev Pesach, Shcholias b'Shabbos. Erev Pesach that falls on Shabbos. So we keep in mind, we mentioned just a few lines back, a few minutes ago, that Erev Pesach, when it falls on a Friday, you can have 48. And what happens if you would have Erev Pesach that falls not on an Erev Shabbos, but on a Shabbos? So now you have 2 musafs. So instead of the 6 blasts of the Erev Pesach, of Erev Shabbos, excuse me, 6 blasts of Erev Shabbos, instead of those 6 blasts, switch that with 9 blasts of a Shabbos, of a Musaf. Now that fits with Reb Yehuda. But now let's think of the other opinion. Who's the other opinion? The rabbis that hold that they would do 27 blasts on Erev Pesach. Now, Erev Pesach, why would they do 27 blasts? Because they had 3 groups of people, 3 groups reciting Hallel 3 times, and every Hallel. Now, this doesn't fit with Rabbi Yehuda, but this follows the other opinion that they would recite Hallel. You know how many times? They recite Hallel altogether 9 times, and if they recited Hallel 9 times, they would blow the trumpets 3 times for each Hallel. That's 27 blows, 27 blasts. So that's on a regular Erev Pesach. So on a regular Erev Pesach, you got 27 blasts, and you have the regular 21 blasts. That's 48. Now imagine if it's Shabbos that day. If it's Shabbos, then how many do you have? You got to add another 9 to that. So we got 48 plus 9 is 57. According to Rabbi Yehuda, he holds that you lose 6 because you don't do Hallel 9 times. You only did Hallel 7 times. And so you have, instead of 9 times, it would have been 27 blasts, 3 blasts each Hallel. According to him, you did 7 Hallels. So you have 7 times 3 is 21, not 27, but 21. So you lose 6. So instead of 57, you would have, according to Rabbi Yehuda, you'd have 51 blasts. So we have cases of more than 48. So let's do this inside. Isn't there ever Pesach Shecholias b'Shabbos, Erev Pesach that falls on Shabbos? The Ila Reb Yehuda, if you want to follow the opinion of Reb Yehuda, which we've quoted before about how many times they said Hallel, and he holds that the 3rd group hardly got through the first paragraph or 2 of Hallel, and so they didn't say it 3 times, that's for sure. So according to him, according to Reb Yehuda, you have less blows because they didn't say Hallel so many times. So according to him, you have Chamshin v'Choda, you have 51. Again, it's 21 of a regular day, and then you have 21 of Erev Pesach Hallels, so it's 42 so far. And then you would have 9 for if it falls on Shabbos. You have a musaf of Shabbos, so an extra 9. So 42 plus 9 is 51. Either Rabbanon, if you want to calculate according to the Rabbanon, if according to the rabbis, then you even have more than that because you do hollow 9 times. So you have 57. Either Rabbanon, Chamshin v'Sheva, you got 57. Because according to the rabbis, you got the 27 for the hollows, 21 a regular day, and then you got 9. So it's basically 21, 27 is 48, and 9 is 57. So why does the Mishnah imply like the maximum is 48 when you really have either 57 or 51? So the Gemara answers that Kikatani midi d'isa b'chol shana. When do we Mishnah say it's calculation? Only things that happen every year. Erev HaPesach, Shcholias b'Shabbos, Erev Pesach that falls on Shabbos, Delesa b'chol shana v'shana loikatani. Doesn't happen every year. That's a very rare occurrence. In fact, it's happened this past year, but it's so rare that the Rabbanim write books about it. They have it's a very complicated situation. Erev Pesach that falls on Shabbos. There's numerous halachas that are applicable. That it's rare. It's a rare occurrence. It could be you sometimes wait 20 years before you have such an occurrence, and so only things that we have regularly every year that the Mishnah picks, and so it mentions that the 48 is the maximum on a regular basis, on a yearly basis. But other than that, you could have randomly, you could have some scenarios where you have more than 48 blasts.
Rabbi.
Yes.
Erev Pesach that falls on Shabbos. I forget what we did, but you can't wash on a challah because it's after the time, and you can't eat matzah because it's before Pesach. So what do we do?
Right. So basically, we woke up early and finished the meal before the time.
And some people do egg matzahs.
Right. The egg matzahs, you need to have a certain shear in order to make hamotzi on it. Yeah. But anyway, so that's the story.